for joining us. Hello, welcome. You are live with the New Mexico Department of Transportation. My name is Jennifer Heyer, Environmental Planner with WSP, and I will be facilitating this meeting on behalf of the NMDOT. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We appreciate you taking the time out of your Tuesday evening to join tonight's virtual public information meeting hosted by the New Mexico Department of Transportation. We're excited to share information about the New Mexico 14 Cerrillos Road Alignment Study from St. Michael's Drive to St. Francis Drive. Keep in mind that if you are calling in and watching online at the same time, please mute the audio on your computer to avoid any echo or disruptions. If you don't have immediate access to the internet, continue to remain on the call line to hear our presentation. Now, before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to go over just a couple housekeeping items. Next slide. Only our presenters will appear on video, and this presentation is being recorded tonight and will be posted on the NMDOT's project website following this event. That website is nm14cerrillos.nmdotprojects.org. It will be put up on the website in the following days. Tonight, we are also offering closed captioning for our online attendees who may need additional assistance. You will need to manually turn on this feature on your end in order to participate and use the closed captioning. To view closed captioning for this presentation, click on the Live Transcript button on your Zoom bar, then select Show Subtitles. Please be aware that the transcription will be automated and some words may not translate correctly. Community members are encouraged to participate live as we move into our Q&A portion at the end of our presentation, which will be approximately 45 minutes from now. As we move into that question and answer portion at the end of our presentation, there are a few ways in which you can participate with us live. If you are joining us this evening through Zoom, you can select the Raise Your Hand function to ask a question live, or you can type a question in the Q&A chat box appearing at the top or bottom of your screen. If you are joining by phone, you will be able to participate by pressing *9 on your telephone keypad. The question and answer session we will have at the end. If you want to add questions in the Q&A chat box throughout our presentation, feel free to do so, but we will wait until the end to take those questions and offer answers. We have a lot of information to share with you this evening, and you may want to get a piece of paper and pen to write down information on how to participate. And also, as you may have noticed, one of our team members will be periodically adding messages in the online chat with details on how to participate in the project. You are also able to feel free to contact me to request a hard copy of tonight's presentation. I can be reached through email at jennifer.hyre@wsp.com, or you can call me at area code 505-878-6577. Next, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our elected officials who are in our virtual audience tonight. Tonight, we have NMDOT Transportation Commissioner Tom Taylor. Thank you for joining us. We have House Representative Joseph Martinez. Thank you. We have Santa Fe City Councilor for District 1, Renee Villarreal. Thank you so much. With Santa Fe County Commissioner for District 2, we have Anna Hansen. Additionally, I'd like to recognize our partnering agencies who are in attendance but not presenting this evening. These include the City of Santa Fe, the Santa Fe Metropolitan Planning Organization, the New Mexico School of the Deaf, and the Santa Fe Indian School. Again, on behalf of the NMDOT, welcome to our event and thank you for joining us. My name is Jennifer Heyer with WSP, and I will be facilitating this meeting on behalf of the NMDOT. Next, I'd like to hand it over to Estefan Gonzalez to introduce you to our team members who are participating this evening. Estefan?
Thank you, Jennifer. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Esteban Gonzalez, the Project Development Engineer managing the project for the New Mexico Department of Transportation. We develop, study, and design projects for our NMDOT District 5 office. We are working with an engineering and environmental firm called WSP to conduct this preliminary engineering study and design on New Mexico 14 Cerrillos Road. I'd like to introduce the team that will be presenting this evening. You have already heard from Jennifer Heyer with WSP. Also presenting this evening will be Project Manager Terry Ward with WSP. Our other team members on the call with us tonight include our District 5 District Engineer, Paul Brasher, Javier Martinez, our District 5 Assistant District Engineer of Design. We have our partners, Regina Willer with City of Santa Fe, our Public Works Director, Eric Ani, Santa Fe MPO Officer, and Sarah Ganley, our subconsultant with Bohannon Houston, who is our lead drainage engineer on the project. Everyone I just introduced will be available to answer questions after our presentation. In addition, I want to recognize the City of Santa Fe, who has been partnering with the DOT to help us develop this project. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Stefan. For those of you who may have joined late, I just want to remind you that we are offering closed captioning for our online attendees who may need additional assistance. You will need to manually turn that feature on your end. To view closed captioning during tonight's event, you can click on the live transcript button on your Zoom toolbar. Then you would click show subtitles. Please be aware that the transcription will be automated and some words may not be translated correctly. So next, I want to talk a little bit of just what our agenda for our presentation today will cover. We're going to offer a brief background of the project. We're going to discuss the NMDOT's project development process. We're going to talk a little bit about the prior public meeting input and stakeholder outreach conducted to date. We're going to talk about the preliminary recommendations for the project. We're going to discuss the corridor and site-specific improvement recommendations. We're going to talk a little bit about environmental, right-of-way, cost, and phasing considerations, present the schedule of where we're at and the next steps for the project. And finally, we will end our meeting with a question and answer session, which will be in about 45 minutes from now. As a reminder, this presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the project website. That website is nm14cerrillos.nmdotprojects.org. Next, I'm going to provide some background about the project along Cerrillos Road. The New Mexico 14 Cerrillos Road study stretches approximately 1.6 miles from St. Michael's Drive to St. Francis Drive. The focus of the study is the Cerrillos roadway corridor, and the project does not include the intersections of St. Michael's or St. Francis. It is just the Cerrillos roadway. This portion of Cerrillos between St. Michael's and St. Francis is actually the final segment of the Cerrillos Road reconstruction effort from Airport Road to St. Francis Drive. The NMDOT completed an environmental assessment in 1998 for these improvements, and construction of the adjacent areas is already complete. Similar to those other segments, the NMDOT will hand off this segment of Cerrillos to the City of Santa Fe at the end of construction. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit just about the purpose and need of the project. The purpose and need of the project is to address deficiencies by improving traffic operations and safety. The project is seeking to update the corridor to meet current design standards, as well as enhance ADA accommodations and multimodal concerns. The existing four-lane divided roadway will remain, and transit stops and multimodal access and connectivity will be considered. The project is needed to address aging and outdated infrastructure. It will enhance and improve the highway so it complies with current design standards. Some of the elements needing to be addressed include pavement deterioration, sidewalks in poor condition, portions with no sidewalks, portions of sidewalks not ADA compliant, sporadic bike facilities, traffic and safety concerns, existing drainage problems and flooding. There are closely spaced driveways. There are also encroachments into the existing right of way. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the NMDOT's process for developing projects and where we're at in the process for the Cerrillos Road project. Currently, we're in the study phase of this project. This is called Phase 1AB by the New Mexico Department of Transportation. During the 1AB study, we identify what improvements are needed and why, and we evaluate potential options that could be feasible to carry through to design and eventual construction. After the prior public and business owner meetings held in 2021 in coordination with our stakeholders, we incorporated that input received to advance the study and refine the improvement recommendations. As we are nearing the study phase, it's nearing the end of the study phase, which is what we're doing now, we're coming back to you today to present the public with our findings and recommendations. And your input is key to helping us advance the project into environmental studies and preliminary engineering design. As part of the process, we've been coordinating with our key agencies and stakeholders that manage resources and lands in and around the corridor. This includes City of Santa Fe Indian School, the School of the Deaf, the Santa Fe MPO, and Fairview Cemetery. Next, I'd like to hand it over to Terry Ward, WSP Project Manager, who will discuss our public meeting and stakeholder outreach efforts to date and summarize the input that we've received. Terry?
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, as Jennifer mentioned, we'd like to talk about the public meeting that we had and some of the stakeholder outreach and efforts that we've received. Next. So last year in July, we held what we call our Phase 1A or our Alternatives Development public meeting, our first public meeting. At that time, we had developed a suite of 10 typical sections. In the meeting, we presented that we had screened those 10 typical sections down to 2, one with a 4-foot bike lane and one with a 5-foot bike lane. Those 2 alternatives that we had screened down to. All of those previous materials are available on our project website that Jennifer featured. Next. So the public meeting, we featured a MetroQuest survey platform as part of that public meeting. Got some great participation. 263 people participated. We received 659 comments with 733 data points. Just a real great portfolio of comments. We also received additional public comments from phone calls and emails. We shared all the comments with the New Mexico DOT, City of Santa Fe, and Santa Fe MPO staff. And we tried to develop an overview or a comment summary report from all of the responses, which we'll feature next. So the first category I'll talk about is improved bike lanes and paths. One of the recommendations that we got was during the Phase 1B detailed evaluation efforts, provide more weighting to the 5-foot bike lane alternative. So what's happened is early in Phase 1B, the 4-foot bike lane alternative was eliminated in close coordination with the city and the MPO. So I'll talk more about that later. Another recommendation was to consider green markings for bike lanes. So as a team that's been talked about, green markings at this time for the bike lanes are not planned. However, wider pavement markings for the lane line between the driving lane and the roadway shoulder bike lane will be reviewed in our next phase, Phase 1D of the project. Another one was to work with City of Santa Fe staff to identify an alternate route, on-road bike route that does not include Cerrillos Road for those bike movements in this area of the community. And that effort has been initiated with the city and with the MPO. And then finally, do not include the drainage gutter width in calculation of the bike lane width, and we have not done that to date. Next. Another category is improved traffic safety. Recommendation to provide more uniform corridor overhead lighting. We'll certainly look at that. Include overhead lighting at a number of intersections, which will be reviewed as part of our next phase. Close the southbound Cerrillos Road turn lane to the New Mexico DOT General Office campus. I'll talk more about that later. We have a concept that actually does that. Implement traffic calming measures such as narrower traffic lanes and landscaping. Those elements are included in our project, our typical sections that we've advanced so far. review and improve traffic signal timing, which we've done, perform a railfan traffic signal access study to determine if a traffic signal is warranted at that location. That's in progress, depending on when traffic conditions allow for updated traffic counts. Implement access management improvements for the businesses across from the Santa Fe Indian School. That is also being looked at as part of the project. And then two of them that we received a number of comments on that aren't part of the project are to consider red light running cameras in cooperation with the city and to increase speed enforcement. Those really are not project specific elements. So just to be clear on those, because we did receive a number of comments. Next. Traffic flow during construction. We did not receive any recommendations from the responses. However, communications will be key in advance of the construction phase. Better bike pedestrian crossings. We received comments to consider the crossings of Cerrillos Road in the Ashbaugh Park, Railfan Alta Vista, Santa Fe Indian School, and other areas where there's long stretches of Cerrillos Corridor that do not have existing crossings. And I'll feature those a little bit later in our site specific improvement recommendations. Incorporate planning for a future Railfan Trail underpass as planned by the Santa Fe MPO. We had discussions as a team. This is not included as part of the Cerrillos Road project currently. Does not mean it can't be done in the future, but just to be clear, it's not included in our current project efforts, but it has been discussed. Another category is add sidewalks where none exist. Improvements are planned to address this concern. And additional land has been requested from the Santa Fe Indian School for improvements in that area of the Cerrillos corridor. Next. How long will construction last? No recommendations, but again, communication will be very key in terms of the construction phase and the impacts and the duration. Another one was remove sidewalk obstructions. Removal of the obstructions were recommended and are planned as part of the project. So that's power poles, hydrants. However, those obstructions can remain as long as there's a minimum of a 4-foot sidewalk clearance. So for example, a power pole is no longer an obstruction if there's a 4-foot sidewalk that traverses around the power pole, just to be clear. And then the last category in terms of all the great feedback we got was aesthetics. Aesthetics in the feedback was a low priority in the survey responses, but it remains an area of importance for the project team. Next. So I want to switch gears now to some preliminary recommendations. Again, preliminary, not final, preliminary recommendations. This is option 8, typical section from our phase 1A. It was presented at the public meeting last year. It's an option that was moved forward. It fits within constrained areas of the corridor, still requires some strips of right-of-way construct, still requires 4-foot sidewalks in some sidewalk constrained areas, but this makes up the foundation of the recommendations moving forward. So I want to give some time to talk through this typical section because everything we show moving forward builds off of this. So if I start in the middle of this option 8 typical section, there's a variable 12 to 14 foot median. 14 feet is needed where there's left turn lanes. We can narrow up to 12 in other areas. The driving lanes, the 4 of them, 2 in each direction, have been narrowed to 10.5 feet to gain some width. The bike lane shoulder here is shown as 4 to 5 feet variable. Again, we've dropped the 4-foot shoulder bike lane, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. There's 2-foot curb and gutter on each side, and then a 5-foot sidewalk. Okay, again, I'm going to walk through that real quick. 12 to 14 foot median in the center, 10.5 foot driving lanes, 4 of them, 4 to 5 foot bike lane shoulder. Again, we've dropped the 4 foot, so that'll turn into 5 foot as you'll see as we move forward. A 2-foot curb and gutter, and then a 5-foot sidewalk. That was from phase 1A. Next slide. Option 9 then from phase 1A, we presented where right-of-way may be available. It's the same foundation of the median, driving lanes, bike lane. It allows, however, where there's some right-of-way availability, a wider sidewalk buffer between the sidewalk and the curbing or the bike lane shoulder. This is where, again, right away would be available, potentially in, for example, the Santa Fe Indian School area. So these were the two typical sections from phase 1A that move forward for additional analysis. Next. So options 8 and 9, which I just presented from phase A, were combined into two corridor-wide alternatives with, again, a variable 12 to 14 foot median, 10.5 foot driving lanes, 4 or 5 foot bike lanes / roadway shoulder, 5 foot sidewalks where feasible, 4 foot minimum in constrained areas, wider sidewalk buffers where right of way is available, like for example, the Santa Fe Indian School. Those options are on the website from the last public meeting. We presented what we called an option 8 4 foot bike lane and 5 foot bike lane. Again, those were all materials presented in 1A, the last public meeting, and have been on the website for some time now. Subsequently then, a study working group was formed in phase 1B, or our detailed analysis phase, to review the phase 1A alternatives and public feedback. So all of the alternatives that I've talked about, all of this great feedback, we formed a study working group to review it. It included the New Mexico DOT, Department of Transportation, City of Santa Fe, and Santa Fe MPO staff. And we had a series of meetings to really steer or drive the phase 1B efforts. As I mentioned then, the 4 foot bike lane roadway shoulder alternative that I talked about was eliminated early on by the study group. So that means only 5 foot bike lane / roadway shoulders are advanced from phase 1A for further analysis. Next. The study working group added then 6 foot sidewalks for consideration in areas where feasible. 4 foot or 5 foot sidewalks may still be required in constrained areas, but now we have a 6 foot sidewalk alternative as well. 5 foot bike lane alternative with 5 foot sidewalks and 6 foot sidewalks. That information is on the project website and are proposed in 1B for further analysis. So again, 5 foot bike lane / roadway shoulder with 5 foot or 6 foot sidewalks. That's the real variable that we're looking at now, or the option to talk about 5 foot sidewalks or 6 foot. And all of that great information is on the project website. The decision on where 6 foot sidewalks will be provided, if any, will be made in phase 2 preliminary design. The analysis for that decision, again, between 5 foot sidewalks and 6, will review costs, right-of-way, environmental aspects, and will consider public feedback. So we really encourage you to provide your feedback. Cost and impacts of right-of-way needs for the sidewalks will need to be carefully considered in the analysis. All recommendations are subject to right-of-way availability, cost, and environmental clearances. The no build, or what I'll call the do nothing alternative, leave conditions in the existing condition, will also be considered, as it always needs to be in a study like this. P&M power poles remain a challenge to resolve. Conceptual level cost estimate to bury the overhead P&M power lines in the corridor is approximately $6 million with no funding source yet identified for that. This cost does not include service reconnection or design costs, which are typically not covered by P&M and can be significant or substantial. The study working group also developed site-specific improvement recommendations, which we will feature shortly. So a layout of the 5 foot sidewalk alternative with 5 foot sidewalks will be shown in the next section of the presentation, along with the site-specific improvements that we promised would be presented at the last public meeting last year in phase 1A. Next, please. So now let's talk about corridor and site-specific improvement recommendations. The typical section again, to recap, variable 12 to 14 foot median, 10.5 foot driving lanes, all 4 of them, 5 foot bike lanes / roadway shoulder, again, 4 foot's been eliminated for that, 5 foot or 6 foot sidewalks where feasible, 4 feet minimum in constrained areas, Again, sidewalk width 5 or 6 feet to be determined in phase 2 final design. Again, we're asking for a lot of feedback on 5-foot versus 6-foot sidewalks in the corridor. Wider sidewalk buffers where right-of-way may be available, for example, the Santa Fe Indian School area. 5-foot sidewalk alternative, again, and site-specific recommendations are next. 6-foot sidewalk alternative information is on the project website. So we're going to show a 5-foot sidewalk. The 6-foot sidewalk alternative information is on the project website. Next. This is a screenshot of the 5-foot bike lane roadway shoulder alternative with 5-foot sidewalks, just to show you what's available on the project website. And just I'll talk a little bit about the colors. In red with the 3 dots is existing right-of-way. In turquoise, it might be a little bit hard to see, but that's the edge of the sidewalk behind there. In green is where new right-of-way or permanent property, new right-of-way is needed to construct the improvements. In orange is a temporary construction permit or a temporary use of the property to build the improvements that is not a permanent use of the property. The blue then, the dark blue on both sides of Cerrillos is curb and gutter. And in the median, the lighter blue shows the center median. So as an example, the median is closed as at Isleta Avenue. There's no means to take a turn from, if I can call it, northbound Cerrillos. I'm going to speak Cerrillos running north and south in terms of the presentation. So northbound Cerrillos will not be able to make a left turn to Isleta. And conversely, Isleta Avenue, people will not be able to make a left out. They'll have to make a right. So that gives you an idea, and you can see it in the background where existing, there was an opening there. It's closed as part of this graphic. So I hope this helps you if you pull up that graphic, walk through the corridor and look at the specific improvements. And I would encourage you to do that and take your time to look at the entire corridor. Next, please. So this is a 5-foot sidewalk alternative. I want to walk you through the corridor and just show you what the sidewalk improvements will look like. In turquoise is the 5-foot sidewalk. In red is 6-foot sidewalk. So on Isleta and San Felipe, we're matching into wider sidewalks as they approach Cerrillos. There's none on this sheet, but in yellow is 4-foot sidewalks. So next, please. So this particular one moving north shows you again the 5-foot sidewalks. We start to see some 4-foot sidewalks on the northeast side, if you will, of 5th Street, because of some buildings that encroach into the right-of-way. In order to fit a sidewalk in there, we have to narrow it up to 4 feet. So we start to see that in this particular layout. Next. Here we see some more of the 4-foot sidewalk and the pieces of turquoise being 5-foot again. And then in the upper part, past the Ashbaugh Park entrance, we start to see a green 10-foot multi-use trail. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on in another slide, but there are some sections of 10-foot multi-use trail facilities in the corridor. Next slide, please. You can start to see here at 2nd Street, then the end of that 10-foot multi-use trail. It connects Ashbaugh Park and 2nd. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more later. I want to talk here about 2nd Street because this slide is the one that'll show it. We've introduced left turn lanes on both sides of 2nd Street as they approach Cerrillos, that signalized intersection of Cerrillos. We narrowed up the lanes, but it was really, really important from our traffic operations study to add the left turning lanes at 2nd. So I just wanted to show that we've done that. Next slide, please. Another section with the 5-foot sidewalks on Navajo Drive area. Next. Here we get to the new Santa Fe Indian School. So we're proposing a permanent signal there. You can see these sidewalks there. We're showing crossing Cerrillos on one side at that location to help, we believe, with pedestrian crossings and the safety of pedestrian vehicular movements there. Next slide. Here we're showing the 5-foot sidewalks up through the Baca and Monterey area. Next. Here we're showing the Alta Vista Railfan. So again, a 10-foot multi-use trail here between Alta Vista and Railfan. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then you see a 4-foot sidewalk piece on the west side, north of Railfan. That's because of the Fairview Cemetery. The existing fencing or railing there encroaches onto New Mexico DOT right-of-way slightly. So to accommodate that encroachment, in lieu of moving that, we have to narrow up the sidewalk in that area to 4 feet. Next. And you see where that 4-foot ends. We get back to 5 feet up through Cordova. Next, please. And here you see some 5-foot turquoise on the east side. The existing sidewalk for the School for the Deaf actually is 6 feet already. So we're not showing any improvements along there. Basically putting in some pedestrian ramp improvements you'll see in red there, and allowing the existing sidewalk along the School for the Deaf to stay in its existing conditions. Next. And then finally, a couple pieces of red on this one to connect into the existing sidewalk, which leads up to St. Francis, and another entrance at the School for the Deaf in terms of some ramp improvements there. So again, just walking you through the corridor so you can see what a 5-foot sidewalk layout looks like, that there are some 4-foot areas. Again, even with a 5-foot sidewalk, there could be some power poles or obstructions where it's a 5-foot sidewalk, but it's actually 4 foot of space or room to use the sidewalk because of a potential power pole or hydrant or something like that, just to be clear on that. Okay, next slide. So let's switch gears now to some site-specific elements for review. I want to talk about bike pedestrian mid-block crossing locations and some options. Talk about multi-use trail connectivity, like I briefly mentioned in the layout for the sidewalks. And then some intersection improvements, just to show you some access management and traffic operations improvements that we're recommending. Next. So to start with, the section of Cerrillos between St. Michael's and the 2nd Street area was highlighted in feedback as a long stretch of Cerrillos with little to no crossing opportunities. And it was recommended we look at that segment and try and footprint the location for a pedestrian bike crossing. The bad news is we didn't find a location that logically connected up to some City of Santa Fe infrastructure, meaning sidewalk or bike trail connections. But the good news is at about the midpoint between San Felipe and the 5th Street area there, we found a location where we believe we could accommodate a crossing. We're showing some pavement markings. That's just to graphically depict the markings. We will determine the actual, if it's marked, how it's marked. Is there any type of signing or signalization, flashing signalization? Those type of infrastructure discussions will be taking place in our next phase. But we did show some markings here just to help graphically depict the location. Okay, so that's one location that has been recommended, and we think we found a location to accommodate that. Next. The next one then is a left turn lane at Ashbaugh Park. There was discussion or feedback about possibly closing the northbound Cerrillos left turn lane to Ashbaugh. The concern was that the left turn lane to Ashbaugh could conflict with the 2nd Street left turn lane. We've decided as a team to recommend keeping a left turn lane at Ashbaugh Park. And you can see that in the red cloud on the screen here. So that's a northbound Cerrillos left turn lane to Ashbaugh Park, so that people northbound on Cerrillos destined for Ashbaugh can make that movement and not have to make some form of a U-turn to get there. Next. This is a 10-foot multi-use trail that I showed before between Ashbaugh Park entrance and 2nd Street. We had a lot of feedback about trying to accommodate bike and pedestrian movements between the 2nd Street and the Ashbaugh Park entrance area. We looked at potentially crossing at 3rd. There was lack of connectivity in terms of the 3rd Street location. So this is connecting that 2nd Street to Ashbaugh Park with a 10-foot multi-use trail. To do this, we do need some property or right of way from the Santa Fe Indian School, and those discussions have been started. But to be clear, a minimum 5 foot we would look here, possibly 6. But if property and right of way discussions are favorable with the Santa Fe Indian School, we would look for potentially this 10-foot multi-use trail along with a bus stop facility. This is a location where we're looking to add a bus stop past the 2nd Street area southbound for Cerrillos Road. It would actually replace the bus stop and move it to this area. Okay, next. This is a 10-foot multi-use trail that I showed between Alta Vista and Railfan to help connect the trails, the rail trail and the Acequia Trail with pedestrians and bicycle users that cross the Railfan area. We looked at using the opposite side of Cerrillos to connect Railfan to Baca. With all the businesses and the potential conflicts with vehicles, we did not feel that was the safest solution. So bringing people down to Alta Vista, providing a 10-foot multi-use trail to bring them up to the New Mexico DOT government general office entrance area, combining that with a potential crossing at the Railfan area, we felt was the best and the safest solution. So that's what we're showing here. Next. Then this is that mid-block crossing then, if you will, that Railfan. Again, we're showing pavement markings just to depict the location. To be clear, what we've done to accommodate this is, as I mentioned in the public feedback, the recommendations to close the southbound left turn lane entrance to the New Mexico DOT general office. We are showing closing that southbound left turn lane. If you look closely at the background mapping, you can see where the existing turn lane is and that we're closing that. So again, this would be a kind of a combined multi-use trail connecting Alta Vista to this crossing, providing this location for bikes and peds in this area to cross Cerrillos. And again, the actual signing and signalization or flashing system installations that would accompany this crossing would be determined as we move forward in preliminary and final design with feedback from the public and from the city and from MPO and our other partners. Next, please. We're featuring a realignment of Cordova, the intersection with Cerrillos. There was several concerns we received from the feedback, one being the distance pedestrians had to maneuver to cross Cordova on the east side. The other being the speed in terms of which drivers northbound on Cerrillos making a right turn on Cordova would drive at. That particular curvature, they're allowed to fairly a higher rate of speed, if you will, in terms of that northbound Cerrillos movement to Cordova. So we've realigned the connection for two purposes. One, to try and soften or dampen the speeds for northbound Cerrillos drivers wanting to make a right turn on Cordova to try and slow them down. Secondly, to shorten the pedestrian crossing distance for pedestrians wanting to cross that particular leg of Cordova to get from the New Mexico DOT Geo Campus area to the opposite side. Okay, next. Here we're showing a New Mexico School for the Deaf left turn lane into their northerly or what they featured as their theater entrance. They have a lot of events in our feedback from the School for the Deaf in the theater area that queues or backs up traffic on Cerrillos. So they requested we look at a left turn lane at this particular location. So we've done that. We're showing where that would be footprinted. In order to do that, however, we need to close an existing southbound left turn lane on Cerrillos to the businesses on the east side. So again, to be clear, this new northbound left turn lane to the New Mexico School for the Deaf northerly or theater entrance would close an existing southbound left turn lane for opposing traffic in the opposite direction. Next. And I talked about that I would feature some access management recommendations. So I'll run through these as is Letta Avenue. I showed you we're closing the median, doing the same at 4th. A recommendation show closing a southbound left turn lane at 3rd, closing the median at the Santa Fe Indian School Cochiti Street location, removing a southbound left turn lane at the new Santa Fe Indian School entrance, reviewing access management for the businesses for business parking across from the Santa Fe Indian School. We'll do that during final design. Railfan Road area, closing that southbound left turn lane to the New Mexico DOT General Office campus, as I just showed you. And the School for the Deaf area, closing that southbound left turn lane, again, that I just showed you in the previous slide. Those are access management recommendations. Next. Traffic operations recommendations then. San Felipe, lengthen the Cerrillos northbound, southbound left turn lanes. 5th Street, do the same. Ashbaugh Park, lengthen the Cerrillos northbound left turn lane. 2nd Street, lengthen Cerrillos northbound and southbound left turn lanes. Add the eastbound and westbound left turn lanes like I talked about in that slide previously, and add a southbound right turn lane on Cerrillos at 2nd. Navajo Drive, lengthen the southbound Cerrillos right turn lane. New Santa Fe Indian School entrance, signalize it, and lengthen the Cerrillos northbound left turn lane. Tasike Drive, lengthen the Cerrillos southbound left turn lane. Baca Street, I'm going to talk about, I've highlighted in yellow because I'm going to talk about it on the next slide. Improvements there really aren't possible due to right-of-way constraints. Railfan, lengthen the Cerrillos northbound left turn lane and perform a signal warrant study, which is planned, both of those, but I'm going to talk about this one in the next slide a little bit more as well. Cordova, realign the westbound approach as I've showed you. Add a westbound dual left turn lane, which I didn't talk about, but we're adding dual lefts at Cordova to help the traffic capacity or operations there, and lengthen the Cerrillos southbound left turn lane at Cordova. The New Mexico School for the Deaf southerly entrance, lengthen the Cerrillos northbound left turn lane, close the Cerrillos southbound left turn lane, and the Cerrillos, New Mexico School for the Deaf north entrance, lengthen the Cerrillos northbound left turn lane. A lot of information there. I talked about it real quick. I just wanted to give you a feel for the lengthening of the turn lanes and the traffic operation recommendations that are also included as part of our study phase in terms of our recommendations, preliminary recommendations. Next, please. So then I talked about signal system coordination and timing adjustments. We have looked at the signal system coordination and timing, giving Cerrillos Road what we call the priority in terms of traffic operations. There is some level of improved traffic flow that we can accommodate, but not a high level of improved traffic flow by coordinating, enhancing the coordination of the signals and the timing. Baca Street, the eastbound approach has capacity challenges, and I mentioned we're not able to resolve those challenges of capacity, traffic capacity, because of the constrained right-of-way on that eastbound approach. When we're just not able to add lanes like we would need to address those eastbound approach capacity challenges at Baca. And then there's some traffic capacity challenges at Railfan. And part of that is really due because of existing traffic circulation. For example, Flagman Way is one way, and it's really outside the scope of the Cerrillos Road project to reach out that far and change circulation on, for example, Flagman Way to try and resolve some of those capacity issues. Next, please. So I wanted to talk now about switching gears to existing drainage conditions. So the existing drainage conditions in the Cerrillos Road corridors, there's 3 drainage outfalls where drainage can leave or exit the Cerrillos corridor. One being the Santa Fe or the New Mexico School for the Deaf outfall, and there's some outlets in that area. 2 being the Baca Street outfall, and you can see some outlets in that area as well. And 3 being the Ashbaugh Park outfall area, where there's some outlets there. There is no storm drain running the length of Cerrillos, bringing drainage down Cerrillos. The hatched area is the New Mexico DOT general office area. And just one more point about the existing drainage conditions. The area south of the DOT general office area, those urban areas highlighted, developed areas highlighted in green on the east side of Cerrillos, south of the New Mexico DOT general office area, that area contributes roughly 70% of the drainage that the Cerrillos Road picks up in terms of drainage flow to Cerrillos. So that's a major contributor to Cerrillos Road, is that residential or urban build-up, commercial area built up east of Cerrillos there on the screen, highlighted in green. Next, please. Drainage improvements then, adding a storm drain trunk line in Cerrillos, tie the existing system into the existing system near St. Michael's, which has a 10-year drainage design capacity. Eliminate the Baca Street outfall that I showed you. That's based on some feedback from the city of Santa Fe and a Sequia Madre staff that we met with, and a field review that our team conducted. So again, eliminate outfall or flows to the Baca Street outfall. No increase to the New Mexico School for the Deaf outfall, and we're striving to reduce or perhaps eliminate the Cerrillos flows to the School for the Deaf outfall as well. Then, to accommodate some of these goals, the New Mexico DOT has moved forward with a geocampus drainage improvement effort. That area that I highlighted roughly receives 13% of the drainage area of Cerrillos, contributes 24% of the total peak flows to Cerrillos. And we're looking at some green stormwater infrastructure and underground infiltration systems to reduce the runoff to Cerrillos. Next slide, please. So this slide is that NMDOT general office campus area, and showing some underground drainage retention facilities that would be built in that area that are proposed to help the Cerrillos drainage. Next. This one shows some above ground surface treatments, again, to help the retention of drainage from the Cerrillos Road. Okay, next please. Site-specific elements, some transit bus stop improvements, landscaping and lighting. Next. So some landscaping and bus stop locations. Might be a little bit hard to see these. These are on the project website. I just wanted to show you that these materials are available. They're on the project website. This slide shows some bus stop locations and the shelter locations throughout the corridor. Next. This one shows some additional locations. And on the top, if you want to go online and you can zoom in, it shows a full-size bus shelter, 14-foot wide, and then a narrower 10-foot wide shelter. So again, these slides will show those specific where narrow shelters are proposed, where the full-size shelters are proposed throughout the entire Cerrillos corridor. We've done a lot of work with Santa Fe Trails in terms of developing these. And I believe this is the final bus stop locational slide. Next. So then some landscaping. This one shows an option for landscaping with some water harvesting crescent depressions. So again, these are on materials on the website, but it's a water harvesting crescent depression to use, to retain stormwater and try and harvest some of that retention. Next. Another view of the same option one, the water harvesting crescent depressions option. Next. This one is an option two then, an angular dry basin with gabion check dams. So in the pictures, you see some rock or gabions. So this is check dams. And another view, same thing, of the gabion check dams with angular dry basins. Next. Okay, same, showing that particular option too. Next. And then we just have some palettes, some material palettes of planting. So these would be the suite, if you will, of a potential material and plant species that at least preliminarily are recommended. So you can go online and look at those and certainly provide any comments or feedbacks. I think there's at least another one of these. Next. Yeah, so this is another of the same similar type materials of, you know, at least what we're proposing as potential alternatives at this point in our efforts. Next. In terms of lighting, the goal will be to move the lighting poles to the outside and not have any in the median areas because of safety and challenges or difficulties in maintaining light standards or poles in the median. So we'll strive to move the lighting to the outside, which we'll have to work closely with P&M if there's power poles in the corridor to do that. Next. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jennifer.
Thanks, Terry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the environmental, right-of-way, cost, and phasing aspects of the project. As part of the alignment study, we've identified other key considerations and constraints to advancing this project. There are numerous historic and archaeological properties along the project corridor, and our environmental studies will be looking closer at these properties in order to minimize potential impacts to important cultural resources in the corridor. The project will also be requiring small strips of right-of-way to be acquired, whether those are permanently acquired or temporarily in construction. Terry talked a little bit about those. The locations of these and the specific amount of right-of-way needed will be determined as the engineering design advances. Currently estimated cost to construct the entirety of the project is around $30 million. As mentioned earlier, the construction will be phased due to funding availability, with phase one being from St. Michael's to Tasuke Drive. This segment has about $16.5 million of funding programmed. This phase will likely include the drainage improvements at the DOT General Office campus. Phase two then will be from Tasuke Drive to St. Francis, which currently has $14 million of programmed funding. Next, I'm going to talk about just our schedule of where we're at in the project and our next steps. The project study began summer 2020 with the Phase AB study and collecting data to develop conceptual alternatives that were presented at the study phase public meeting in July 2021. We also had the business owner meeting at that same time, and we're having our second set of a public meeting today. We anticipate completing the study by July-August 2022, at which point the NMDOT will have a recommended alternative to advance into initial engineering and environmental analysis. That will begin this summer and carry through into fall of 2022. We will incorporate the feedback received from this public meeting and during our 30-day comment period and continue to advance the project. We do plan to have another public meeting later this year after we have further refined and advanced a preferred option. We expect to finalize design by the end of 2023, the start of 2024, with construction of the first phase starting as soon as spring, summer 2024. As mentioned, the construction will be phased, and phase two construction will occur immediately after phase one is complete. So for our next steps on the project, we're going to be gathering input from the public, from all of you today and after our event. Many of you have already commented and sent us questions, which is fantastic, and we've been gathering that information. We're going to work on completing the detailed Phase AB study analysis and preparing the study report. We're then going to complete the environmental studies and documentation, develop preliminary design plans. We'll gather additional public input that will allow us to then develop final design plans. We'll also be identifying the right-of-way acquisition needs for the project, and then we'll be preparing the project for construction letting. Well, you've heard from us, and now we would like to hear from you. But before we open it up for our question and answer session of tonight's event, I want to tell you how you can contact me and how you can reach me to provide your comments and thoughts to our project team and ask questions about the project. You are welcome to email me at jennifer.hyre@wsp.com. You can call me at area code 505-878-6577 You may also feel free to send your questions and comments through postal mail at our WSP office in Albuquerque. There is also an electronic comment form available on the NMDOT project website. That project website is nm14cerrillos.nmdotprojects.org. And many of you have actually been using the online comment form, and that's been a fantastic way for you to reach us. So thank you for doing that. And for those of you who have also been providing emails and phone calls, thank you for doing that. We are glad you're participating. We do prefer that you send us electronic submittals. Paper is fine, but electronic is preferred, and we do ask that you provide your input by June 3rd in order to allow us to continue to be able to compile your information, review it, and continue to advance the project. As mentioned earlier, you can request a copy, paper copy of tonight's presentation. More project information and visual aids of the information presented tonight, as well as the contact information for the project team, is available on the DOT website. And we will post a recording of this meeting on the website very, very soon. We're looking forward to your questions, and we will be getting ready to answer those shortly, but I just want to remind folks of how they can ask their questions. And then we're going to start taking our first question. So if you are participating with us online through Zoom, you can select the raise your hand feature to ask a question live, and we will unmute you. Another option is you can type your question in the Q&A chat box located in the toolbar. If you are joining us through the telephone, you can press *9 and we will be able to bring you into the meeting and unmute you. So with that, let's take our first question. We have a question from Tim. His question is, will direct access from Cerrillos Road to Oddfellows be closed to accommodate the pedestrian crossing from the NMDOT Geo campus? That's a really good question, Tim. Thank you for asking that. Terry, would you be able to help us answer Tim's question?
Yeah, so again, this is preliminary conceptual. So the details of existing locations changing, is the potential that that could be impacted? There's that potential. Again, preliminary, it's a great question. It's really a detailed question that we would certainly reach out to the impacted parties if that move forward with impacts to that particular entrance. So it's not a a specific direct answer, but it's a great question, and again, a detailed question. Esteban, would you like to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Terry. Yes, so our process is right now, Terry's team performed a safety analysis of all the access points throughout the corridor. They gave us their recommendations. Our next step when we move to the design phase is we plan to meet with property owners individually and do property owner interviews to just discuss those changes and consider any concerns for each location. So that will be forthcoming in the design phase of the project.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Stefan. Flor, I think we might have someone who has raised their hand who is interested in coming live to ask a question. Is that correct?
Yes, Jennifer, we have Justin Sachs. I am going to go ahead and unmute the microphone. Justin, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I have actually kind of three things that I've noticed. I'm a business owner in the Baca Rail Yard. I've been here for 14 years when it first opened to businesses when they redesigned it. At that time, we were told that the reason Flatman Way was a one-way street is that there was a plan to put a light in at Railfan. Now that we have multiple businesses, residencies, and now an apartment complex going in, I think it's long overdue for a light. And that one way on Flagman Way is it works only if there's a light out on the street. That was the whole purpose. My next concern is with you mentioned Cordova being a dangerous right turn off of Cerrillos going north, and I'm wondering why putting a right turn lane there wouldn't be helpful, because it seems like when there's a lot of cars going that way, get mixed in, some going straight, some going right, people squeezing into the shoulder to try and get by, that's something that I think could help the safety of that intersection tremendously. And then my third comment is going south onto Cerrillos Road onto St. Michael's. There's a left-hand turn lane there that accommodates easily 8 cars, and I would say only 2 to 3 cars can make a left turn there. So that seems like a very easy thing to fix immediately. That's what those are my comments.
Okay, great. Thank you, Justin. Let's see. Terry, would you be able to help us with talking about with the signal light at Railfan?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Esteban, I'll probably turn it to you. I mentioned as part of our scope of work or services, we are going to do what's called a signal study. We have to look at warrants. There's requirements for putting signal ins. They're called warrants. So the study would actually look at answering the question, does that intersection of Cerrillos and Railfan rise to the level to meet the warrants for putting in a traffic signal? And that study, again, is part of our scope. We need the traffic conditions to stabilize, if you will, to do a good, valid study in terms of the traffic in that area and look at the signal warrants. In terms of the Flagman Way and the master plan and the history there, Esteban, could I toss that to you?
Yes, we did. When we started the project, as Terry mentioned, we didn't see in our coordination efforts with City of Santa Fe, we didn't have any signal warrant studies that were done that justified placing a signal at Railfan. So we did receive a lot of public feedback on that. So we are going to be doing that signal warrant analysis. And as Terry mentioned, it's important to really determine when to go back out there and do traffic counts. During the pandemic did change traffic counts for us by reducing traffic along roadways. So it seems like things are getting a little bit back to normal. So we'll work with our traffic engineers to address that. And then I believe also Regina Willer has some additional comments on the Flagman Way. So I'll turn it over to Regina.
Thank you so much, Esteban. And thank you, Justin, for your question. Regina Wheeler, Public Works Department Director at the City of Santa Fe. We have actually had a capital improvement to make Flagman Way a two-way street for some time now. I think there's more benefit to that than there is the one-way at this point. So we're working closely with this team, obviously, on this project, and we also are carrying that Flagman Way two-way improvement on our capital list. And so we're aware that improvements are needed there, and would like to stay in touch with you as the project moves on and make sure we can get some solutions going for the Baca Rail Yard. Thank you.
Eric, did you have something to add to that? I see that your hand's up.
Yes, I do. Just for the record, and if it's helpful, the rail yard master plan, page 4, articulates a Baca Entrada, a main entry from Cerrillos Road to the Baca area. In the future, in coordination with the development on State Highway Complex across Cerrillos Road, the Baca Entrada can be a signalized intersection. That is a direct quote from the plan and probably a derivative of where the nice gentleman who brought this up, where it came from. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for helping to answer that for us.
Then Jennifer, Justin had 2 additional questions. The right-hand turn, northbound Cerrillos onto Cordova. We did look at the traffic turning movements, and right now we didn't see that the turning movements met the minimum to warrant a right turn bay at the time. We did think that Cordova reducing that crossing length for pedestrians outweighed that right turn bay. So that's how we arrived at not having a right turn bay there at northbound Cordova, or northbound Cerrillos Road to eastbound Cordova. Your last question, Justin, the left turn from southbound Cerrillos onto St. Michael's, you mentioned was short. That has to do with signal timing. Right now, City of Santa Fe, I believe, controls the signal timing for the corridor. However, part of our design, we are doing interconnecting the signals throughout the corridor. So we're looking at trying to just maximize the signal timing throughout the corridor. It's definitely a challenge considering all the lanes are pretty full as they are. And I think that answers your 3 questions there. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. That was very helpful. I believe we have another person who has their hand raised. Is that correct, Flor?
Yes, we have Gary Schmiller. Pardon me if I mispronounced your last name. Gary, I have gone ahead and unmuted you. Go ahead, please, with your question.
So my question relates to the signal warrant study at Railfan. I use that crossing a lot. And if it turns out that a signal is not warranted there, might you consider having a pedestrian actuated flashing beacon, sort of similar to the one on Cordova Road east of St. Francis by the CVS over there?
It's a good question. Thank you, Gary. Stefan, would you be able to help us answer that question?
Yes, so you're referring to the rectangular rapid flashing beacons on Cordova. Yes, as Terry mentioned in his presentation, we're looking at a crossing there at Railfan, and part of the design is where we'll meet with City of Santa Fe and see how we want to mark and sign or control that crossing. Right now, the rectangular rapid flashing beacons is an option.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question from one of our online listeners. Davis asks, I'm very concerned about traffic in the Casa Alegre neighborhood. Drivers are already cutting through too often at high speeds. How many cars turn right from southbound Cerrillos Road to Osage, especially during construction? What will be done to discourage right turns at San Jose or San Felipe and blast through the neighborhood? Good question. Thank you, Davis. Terry, would you be able to help us with starting to answer that question?
Yeah, without having specific traffic numbers in front of me, I'll defer on the first question about how many cars turn right from southbound Cerrillos to Osage. I think I'm just going to say I'm hoping the root of this question is really the part about during construction, what will be done to discourage right turns and drivers going through neighborhoods. That's a really great question, and the construction of Cerrillos and the maintenance of traffic is something that we've looked at conceptually, but there's a lot of work to do to be put forth with the partners in terms of what is the phasing, what is the staging, how is traffic maintained, are there diversionary routes, what do they look like, where's signing, all of those types of questions are yet to come and yet to be worked on. So it's a little early because we don't have answers to it yet, but it's great to have this feedback because it solidifies that we know we need to work on these types of questions. So again, with the community, with our partners, we look forward to this type of feedback, and it really helps position us to provide the most effective maintenance of traffic plan moving forward.
Thank you for that, Terry. Do we have anyone else with their hand raised, Flor?
Yes, we do. We have Candace Rare. Candace, I am unmuting you at this time. Go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, you can hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay, so I don't know if Terry said this or not, but I thought he said that a left turn lane off of northbound Cerrillos into Ashbach Park would not be possible if there was also left-hand turns on Cerrillos and Second. Did I understand that correctly?
That's a good question. Thank you, Candace. Terry, would you be able to help clarify that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Yeah, we're showing a northbound left turn lane from Cerrillos to Ashbaugh Park as part of our recommendations. We're also showing left turn lanes on Second Street approaching Cerrillos in both directions. So we're actually recommending both,
Oh,
and they're not tied together. If one happens, it doesn't eliminate the other one. Does that help?
okay. Thank you. I really encourage the Second Street left-hand turn lanes because I live back behind that neighborhood and there's a lot of traffic that flows through there to avoid that intersection, I think. I followed people. So, am I still being heard?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So, and I also want to make another comment. With all these bike lanes, a big concern for me is that people don't know how to ride their bikes. They don't understand the safety issues with riding a bike. And I don't know if there's any classes in Santa Fe that teach this, but I have almost hit 2 or 3 people because they weren't following the right rules and they just appeared in front of me out of nowhere. And I don't know if bike turn lanes would help that or make it worse. That's just a comment.
That is a very good comment. Yes, there. I think we would all be helped by having extra education for vehicles and bicyclists. So thank you so much, Candace.
Thank you.
From one of our online listeners, Mark has a question. His question is, were you planning to close the southbound turn bays? Oh, sorry, pardon me, where you are planning to close the southbound turn bays, will there be signage installed or consideration to prevent left turns at these areas that will back up traffic? It's a good question. Thank you, Mark. Terry, would you be able to help us answer that question?
Yeah, sure. So that's a question, I believe, the existing southbound left turn lane bay is there. People are used to using it as part of the project. We're potentially closing it, or ones we move forward and close. Any special type of signing or consideration to try and prevent drivers from making what was their customary movement, if you will. Yeah, part of that's public outreach, part of that's an understanding of the corridor. Part of it may be some temporary type signing. We would have to work with our traffic engineers in that regard. But that chapter of this project is yet to come in terms of, the plan, if you will, where those locations will occur in the project, assuming they do. So great question. Don't have an exact answer. It's more of a detail, but this really helps us make sure we zero in and focus on that as we move forward.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Terry, for answering that. We have a question from Lynn online. Her question is, why did you reject the green bike lanes? And is there any way you can provide a barrier, no matter how small, like a 2-inch wide and 3-inch tall concrete curb between the driving lanes and the bike lanes, at least where you don't have traffic going through? It's a good question. Thank you, Lynn. Terry, would you be able to speak to with the green bike lanes and then about for having a type of barrier separating the travel lanes from the bike lane?
Yeah, I'll start with the barrier. Any type of barrier needs to be put in a situation where it's crash tested, it's appropriate for the location. And in this particular location, You'd have to think about maintenance and wintertime snow removal that does happen, those types of things. So are there devices or features that could be put there potentially? Or are they is this the right location for them? Maybe, maybe not, but those are details as we move forward as a team. Again, these are a lot of detailed type questions that we'll talk about and think about and work on. In terms of green bike lanes, Regina, from a city's perspective, we had some good discussion about green markings for bike lanes. Would you like to follow up on that piece of it?
Thank you so much, Terry. Gosh, I'm afraid I don't actually have the answer about the green. I don't know if Eric Ani does. But I did want to add for Lynn that we are Public Works Department at the City of Santa Fe and MPO and our Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. We're all looking for places to pilot protected bike lane in the City of Santa Fe where it does meet some of the criteria that Terry mentioned. So that's definitely on our radar about really increasing our multimodal access and bicycle safety. So we're, watch for stuff coming from us on that. But I wonder, I don't know if Eric could speak to the green versus not green.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. It's a great question. And for clarity, there's often confusion and the city of Santa Fe participated in a green light marking pilot project in 2015. The confusion can be this, is that the lanes themselves ought to be colored green to provide a distinguishing differential between the roadway and the bike lane. Those aren't the case in terms of the guidance around green bike lanes. It is the treatments that occur. And I believe there still is opportunity for discussion with this team, especially Terry, when considering the approaches to intersections, for example, where green markings at those areas can help distinguish where bikes ought to be when there are conflict points, such as intersections and crossings and the like. So I hope that helps. And I think there might be opportunities. What there was previous discussion that I've been privy to was marking the entirety of the lanes green, and that's just not within the guidance. So hopefully that helps.
Great. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Regina and Eric. Flor, I believe we have someone with their hand up ready to ask a question.
So we do. We have Hubert
Great.
Van Heck. Hubert, you may go ahead and ask your question.
Unmute. Yes, I also want to speak to the issue of the bicycles. It's a little disappointing to see that the current proposal still includes a situation where bikes share the asphalt with 40-mile-an-hour cars and trucks. As you can observe, just about every day, cars drift over that white line into the bike lane all the time and back out again if you're lucky. In the July last year presentation, there was an option number 5. In option number 5, the curb was pushed out and the area, the raised area was then available for both pedestrians and bicycles. I can assure you that bicycles would not be unhappy with being on a protected raised bike path, even if it is shared with pedestrians, and have to go up and down a few times. I remember the other reason that option 5 was rejected was that the engineer said that we need the bike lane to deal with drainage issues. That's an engineering issue that that can be solved. In 2022, just painting a little white line on the asphalt is no longer a reasonable option to provide for bicycles. The good news is that if you build some really nice sidewalks, that is where the bicycles will end up. In fact, you can see that further out on Cerrillos, half the time when you see a bicycle out on Cerrillos, it's on the sidewalk. It's not on the little painted white line bicycle lane because they're deadly. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you, Hubert. Appreciate it. Terry, do you want to add anything about the option 5 and some of the considerations of why we removed that was eliminated?
Sure. Yeah, I think we have those keyed up after the question slide. If we could go to option 5, if we could forward the presentation to option 5. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so this is option 5 that you're talking about. We're showing a 12-foot multi-use trail on both sides, but you could potentially look at a multi-use trail on one side. The issue becomes, in order to do that, you can see there's 8 feet of additional right-of-way needed. If you do it on both sides, it's 8 feet on each side, which is impactful. And then you'll also see that we're eliminating a shoulder. So yeah, at the first public meeting last year in July, John Romero from the DOT said one of the issues or challenges with this is when drainage or heavy rains occur on Cerrillos, you don't have that shoulder area then to handle or pond, if you will, some of the drainage flow. It goes right onto the driving lanes. So that was Mr. Romero's answer to a similar question that was brought up back then. Is this removes that ponding area that could be accommodated on that roadway shoulder that was there. So those are a couple issues in terms of negative aspects of this option, the impacts of that additional right of way, and then the drainage as John talked about. And then as you get into intersections without that shoulder area, the potential of turning movements and potential conflicts with some intersection areas was another aspect of it. So, okay, thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. That's helpful. And thank you, Hubert, for your questions and comments. From one of our online listeners, Marty, his question is, what are the acronyms SFMSO and WSP? What do they stand? That's a very good question. We at WSP get that question quite a lot. So actually, for WSP, the acronym actually stands for William Sales Partnership, which was the original name of the company a very, very, very long time ago in the 1900s, and they shortened it to WSP. The SFMSO, I'm not sure where that appeared in our presentation. Can anyone on the team help answer that one?
Jennifer, I think that might be SFMPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, perhaps. Eric Ani's organization, and that's a group that does sort of medium and long range transportation Santa Fe, actually the whole region. And Eric would be better suited to answer the question, but I think that's my guess of the acronym, Santa Fe Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Okay. Thank you, Regina. That's helpful. A question from one of our online listeners, Sydney. Sydney asked, do you have pedestrian studies? It's a good question, Sydney. Terry, would you be able to help us answer that question?
Yeah, do we have pedestrian studies? We have some pedestrian data, some pedestrian information. We work closely with Eric Ani and the MPO in terms of, the planning efforts for bikes and peds in this Santa Fe region. So we have access to pedestrian information. Does our team didn't do any specific pedestrian studies as part of our scope. Eric, anything to add from the Metropolitan Planning Organization perspective in terms of the planning level information you have?
Yes, I'd be happy to jump in. The MPO cannot underscore the importance of counting peds and bikes throughout the network. Just last year, the MPO, working with the NMDOT, helped spearhead a new initiative to do a pilot project for the camera, using cameras to count bikes and peds and vehicles at critical intersections. It did not include this specific project, But we recognize the importance of doing that and want to continue to urge our partners to consider PED calculations in an equivalent manner with vehicle. So at this juncture, as far as I know, Terry, there wasn't any specific PED analysis done at this time.
Okay, thank you, Eric. That's very, very helpful. I see that Marty clarified some of the questions in the chat. Thank you for doing that. It was in reference to the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization. The question was, what are those organizations? As mentioned earlier, WSP, we're the engineering and environmental consultant firm that was hired by the New Mexico Department of Transportation to help assist with developing the project. And Regina talked a little bit about the role of the MPO. So hopefully that those take care of the questions that you had. Thank you for asking those, Marty. Fleur, do we have anyone who has their hand raised who'd like to be brought on live?
Yes, we have
Great.
Gary Schuttler with another question. Gary, I have gone ahead and unmuted you. Please ask your question. Gary, you may go ahead and ask your question, please.
Okay, now I believe it's unmuted. In terms of bicycles and the shoulder, I understand people's desire to have a separated bike lane, and that would be ideal. But it sounds like there may not be the right way space to do that or the drainage. But perhaps a painted barrier rather than just a 4-inch wide line would help. It's not as good as a physical separation, but just to have a visual barrier between the lane, the traffic lane, and the bike lane might be useful, even if it was a foot wide or so, rather than, like I said, just a 4-inch wide white line. I don't know if that's a possibility, but maybe it could be considered.
Thank you, Gary. Yes, that's helpful. That definitely, yeah, we'll be looking at some of the ways of what we can do as we advance the design further for the bike lanes. Terry or Stefan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, Jennifer, I'll add to that. Yes, Gary, thank you for that question. And we are right now considering a thick lane line versus our standard lane line thickness for an urban area is 4 inches. So we are considering a thicker lane line between the driving lane and the bike lane.
Great, thank you, Stefan. Let's see. From one of our online listeners, an anonymous attendee asks, I arrived late to the presentation. Will phase 1 include protected bike lanes? Terry, do you want to, or Stefan, do you want to help us just kind of answer a little bit about that? We've kind of discussed a little bit more, but I want to make sure that since this person did arrive late, that that they're aware of what is potentially planned for protected bike lanes.
I can answer that, Jennifer. Right now, no, we determined that we just do not have the right-of-way width in that section of corridor to fit protected bike lanes.
Great, thank you for that, Stefan. Flora, do we have anyone else who's raised their hand that was interested in coming live?
No, all our questions are in the Q&A at this time, Jennifer.
Fantastic. Okay. One of the other questions from our online listeners, Mark asks, are existing trees going to be saved and what other landscaping is planned? It's a good question, Mark. Thank you for that. Terry, can you help answer the question for landscaping and trees?
Yeah, unfortunately, as part of the improvements, we are showing removal of some existing trees. I showed the landscaping. As we move forward, there is planned to be a landscaping effort to help try and beautify the corridor. So that's couple pieces. There are some trees in the median that are growing quite large, difficult to maintain. And so some good news, some some challenging news there, I guess.
Thank you, Terry. One of the other questions we have from our online listener, Joe, will the project install a new sewer system? I'm guessing that with the sewer system, you mean a storm drain system. Terry, do you want to help us answer this question?
Yeah, as I mentioned in the presentation, we're planning a storm drain trunk line in Cerrillos. The city is looking at some upgrades to the existing water and sanitary sewer systems in the corridor. So there's really kind of three different pieces of the utilities there to talk about. So again, storm drain included, sanitary sewer, cities looking at some upgrades, and as well as water.
Great, thank you, Terry. Another question we have from Tim online. I disagree with the comment of putting bikes on the sidewalk, as does ASHTO and League of American Bicyclists. No, bicycles do not belong on the sidewalk. It is not safe due to conflicts with cross traffic. Thank you for that comment, Tim. That's very helpful. A question from another one of our online listeners. There are not clear rules for biking and drivers' roles, although we should follow the rules of the road. For example, right turn lanes for bikes are dangerous. There is no rule that I know of that says who should yield, a car driver or a cyclist when turning right, or if the biker continues forward and a driver wants to turn right, should the driver slow down and wait? That's a really good question. Estefan, would you be able to speak to kind of some of that driving etiquette for vehicles and bicyclists when they're using a roadway facility?
Yes, I'll probably have Eric Ani help me out with this question. It really depends on what the rules are, city ordinance and state statutes on who has right of way. I believe um, drivers and bikes are supposed to, when they're in their designated lanes, whenever they pass those areas where a driver has to weave through the to a right turn bay. I believe the driver needs to wait until there's no conflict, so that way they could cross. But I'll have Eric Ani, if you could help me out with that one.
Yeah, Stefan, I think you said it well. I've been in this precarious situation multiple times in the network. It's not an easy answer. Bicyclists by law have the same rights as drivers of vehicles. And when a right turn scenario is when a bicyclist is pulling up to an intersection, it's up to the bicyclist not to jump in front of a car necessarily and take a right, but to yield to that car. And it's sort of an awkward scenario logistically, but there you have it. It really, you have to consider yourself as a bicyclist, as a vehicle. And often that's not easy because of the differential and, clearly the size. But that's sort of the law. Again, it's not a simple answer, so that's the best I can do.
Okay, thank you, Eric. That's very helpful. And thank you, Stefan. Another question that we have from one of our online listeners, Stephen. As Santa Fe grows, which it will clearly do, the volume of traffic on Cerrillos, the main urban thoroughfare, will increase. It would seem to me the focus should be on increasing the volume and speed of vehicular traffic on Cerrillos rather than accommodating bicyclists. I've driven that stretch a dozens of times and have yet to see any bicyclists and pedestrians. The focus seems counterproductive in terms of increasing overall efficiency. Thank you for that, Stephen. Terry or Stefan, do you want to speak to the focus for the study?
I think Regina raised her hand. Regina, you.
Thank you so much, Terry. Regina Wheeler, from Public Works Director for the City of Santa Fe. I just like to address that a little bit. One of the things to note is when you don't see any bicycles on a roadway, it could be because it doesn't have good facilities to accommodate the bicycles. And so that's, I mean, there's a lot of our roadways in the City of Santa Fe that you don't see bicycles on, and we're really working to change that by really improving our network so that it's a viable mode of transportation. That's really critical for the City of Santa Fe from a number of perspectives. Of course, our sustainability goals to become net zero by 2040. Also, really accommodating younger families to be excited to live here. Not all people want to commute in their vehicles anymore. They want to ride a bike. There's a lot of members of our community that actually don't drive. And we forget to accommodate transportation alternatives for those folks. The other thing is that the City of Santa Fe found this particular piece of the Cerrillos Road Corridor to be very important for pedestrians and bicycles as it connects to our trail network and the train stations. So this is a multimodal hub, this particular little segment. And it's also, if you think about it, it becomes less of a thoroughfare and more of a gateway to Santa Fe is the way we see it. You start getting into sort of the older cultural representation of Santa Fe. So those are a lot of things that we think about when making sure that we have pedestrian and bicycle facilities. But your point is really well taken. There are a lot of cars here, and DOT has been a really strong partner with us in figuring out how to really accommodate the needs of all the traffic on this roadway. So thank you. Thank you for the question.
And thank you, Regina, for helping us answer that. Another question from one of our online listeners, Tim. Tim's comment, bump out at Cordova is a good design, thank you. More right turn lanes on this road will mostly serve to increase motor vehicle speeds and intersection complexity, like on the parts of Cerrillos Road further south. I would like to see the NMDOT stripe a 5-foot shoulder bike lane on southbound Cerrillos immediately west of St. Francis Drive to conform to the rest of the roadway all the way to Madrid, New Mexico. Instead, there's an extremely wide travel lane and no shoulder just off this project limit, but a simple matter of striping. Thank you for that comment, Tim. That's a good comment. Eric, would you like to help us answer that question?
Yeah, and in fact, it was a result of Tim's comments in earlier that made the MPO aware of this scenario. And the MPO is going to be working with our partners, the city and the NMDOT in the future to look at that stretch of Cerrillos now that it is the city's responsibility to reconfigure that accordingly. So thank you. It's on our radar, and it's a great observation.
Thank you for that, Eric. That's very, very helpful. And thank you, Tim. From one of our online listeners and anonymous attendee, comment about cyclist education. That is a difficult proposition given that there are many recreational cyclists that are not educated on the rules of the road. There are local cycling groups that could help educate all cyclists. Yes, that is a very good point. Santa Fe has a number of local cycling organizations that are able to help with education. So thank you for that. Another comment we have from an online listener, Joe. I represent Bias New Mexico, LLC. We own the Thunderbird Inn. Over the past 2 years, we have had three vehicles crash into our property. Vehicle speed has been a problem. What will be done? It's a good question, Joe. Terry, would you be able to speak a little bit about for traffic calming of vehicle speeds along the corridor?
Yeah, some of the thought of calming vehicle speeds is narrowing lanes, which we're doing. The driving lanes existing are 11 feet, so we're going to 10.5 for the 4 of them. Part of it is landscaping or elements in the corridor, so that's where we're looking at landscaping. So the calming effect, if you will, that is part of our portfolio already, if you will, to the best that we can. But people speeding, there's been recommendations of enforcement and red light running camera. Some of those are outside the purview, if you will, of the project. And as things move forward and the DOT and the city work together, I'm sure those discussions will take place.
Thank you for that, Terry. Very helpful. Another question that we have from one of our online listeners, street light poles, could you describe style and type of lights that will be used, amber, bright white, etc. That Terry, maybe if you can kick us off answering that, and then we can kind of put that over to Regina with City of Santa Fe.
Well, it's a detailed question again that, we're conceptual now. Standard DOT light poles, some of them, they're roughly around 40 feet tall. In terms of the type of lighting, or whether they're shields that keep lighting from going into businesses or homes, those are real lighting details that we'd work on when we get into design.
Thank you so much, Terry, and thank you, Mark Anthony, for the question. As you might know, we just, the governing body has just adopted a new dark sky friendly and energy efficient street lighting design. And it calls for 3,000 Kelvin lights on a road like Cerrillos, on a main road. And I can't remember right off the top of my head the lumens, but it is posted on santafeled.com, gives you quite a bit of detail as well as the specifications. There is a little bit of transition going on for everybody. The City of Santa Fe, of course, picked a very progressive street lighting design, and is actually a little bit lower lumens and lower Kelvin than what NMDOT usually uses. So, they're working on their spec, and we're working with them on the transition. So ultimately, the lights on that roadway will meet our City of Santa Fe adopted street lighting design. That's a dark sky compliant. It has the shields as Terry just mentioned, and there may be a little bit of a transition period as we get to those lights. Actually, the timing may be perfect because construction won't be for 2 years. So that may all come together at the same time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that, Regina. It's actually really interesting. I had no idea you guys were doing that. That's great. Another question that we have from an online listener, how can a biker anticipate a car coming up behind that wants to turn right? That's a good question. Thank you. Eric, I know you were kind of talking a little bit about bike and vehicle driver safety and protocol. Would you be able to help us answer that question?
I'd be happy to. Yeah, I attended a training by the League of American Bicyclists in Santa Fe on the roadway. And one of the techniques they taught us was a very safe over the left. If you don't have a mirror on your bicycle, over the left shoulder, glance back to look at the behavior of vehicles behind you so that you do not get hit. And when approaching an intersection, it is a practice that I learned and would recommend is that looking over, you take your left hand so that you don't imbalance your bicycle, put it on your lower back, and move your head left to look at the cars approaching. That way you can establish eye contact so that they know you're there, you know they're there. That's the that was a really good a training lesson that I received when approaching an intersection.
That's great. Thank you, Eric. That's very, very helpful. Fleur, do we have anyone that has their hand raised that is interested in coming live?
At this time, no attendee has their hand raised. Now we only have a question from an anonymous attendee in the question box.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our online listener, the comment about bikes on sidewalks, I think they meant cyclists go on the sidewalk, not because they don't know if it's unsafe, but it's equally unsafe to share the asphalt with 40+ mph vehicles. And so it is the safest or safer option to get onto the sidewalk. That's what I understood. That I would agree with that. That was how I took that as well. So thank you for that comment. That's helpful. Does anyone on the team want to add anything else about that? Okay, great. So I don't see that we have any more. Thank you, Hubert, for confirming that that was what you meant. Thank you. So I don't see that we have any more questions. So I'd like to actually, if Paul Brasher, District 5 District Engineer, is still on the line with us, I would love to pass it over to him to give some remarks and just help us with wrapping everything up.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate it here. To everybody that's participated tonight and joined in, you can tell that obviously in this corridor, the need is great and the issues have complexities that you can see from the variety of factors that are being considered for improvements in this corridor. The city of Santa Fe is both growing and aging. We are addressing the deterioration of infrastructure and the need for modernizing the functionality in this city whose founding goes back over 400 years. So the historic context isn't lost on us. There'll be going forward, there'll be ongoing maintenance of everything that we build from this plan. But realistically, this current effort is likely to be the last major corridor revision to occur in this stretch for decades to come. So we're doing everything we can to make it last. And when it comes to construction, build it with quality. So that gives us, that's kind of a unique opportunity for us, something for us to take part in. So we've assembled a team of highly experienced professionals to consult with us in this work. And as you've seen here tonight, and at the same time, in the Department of Transportation, we're fortunate to have been further assisted in the work by our colleagues from the city of Santa Fe, the Santa Fe Metropolitan Planning Organization, that's the MPO, the New Mexico School for the Deaf, and the Santa Fe Indian School. We're always grateful for the cooperation and advice of these entities, and all the more for the wealth of input we've received from the general public, both privately and in the public forums like these. Then, through the funding efforts of our elected officials and their wisdom in finding and making the money to make this call come true, we are assured that there'll be a successful project that's going to serve us all for decades to come. And this will be a huge undertaking that we'll all look back on with a great deal of pride in having been a part of. So I want to thank the elected officials who joined us tonight. I want to thank New Mexico DOT District 5 Commissioner Tom Taylor for joining in. And I want to thank all the members of the public who provided these thought-provoking comments and give us more to think about, more to do, reflect on, and make beneficial changes. So with that, just finally, thank everybody who's with us for joining in. Thank you, Jennifer.
You're welcome. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, thank you all of you for joining us this evening. We're glad that we were able to share our Tuesday evening with you and that you did with us as well and provided comments. Feel free to, after the meeting, send more questions and comments. And yeah, your input's really helpful to help us keep moving the project forward. So thank you and have a good night.